E. A. Wallis Budge's The Dwellers on the Nile, The Life, History, Religion, and Literature of the Ancient Egyptians continues with Chapter 9, Literature of the Ancient Egyptians. We owe our knowledge of Egyptian literature to the inscriptions on pyramids, temples, historical and biographical stelae, rolls of papyri, etc. These are written in the hieroglyphic, hieratic, and demotic scripts, and cover a period of about 3,500 years. The language employed is Egyptian, of which there appear to have been 3 dialects, if not more. The foundations of the language are African. Well, of course it's in Africa, right? But at a comparatively early period, additions to them were made as a result of the influence of the Semites. At a latter time, words were borrowed from the Libyans and the peoples of the eastern deserts, and from Arabia and the countries beyond. The style is rhythmic, rhyme being unknown. The use of parallelism of members is frequent, and is often employed with very fine effect. The literature of Egyptian may be divided into 2 classes, religious and profane, and at least 3/4 of it belong to the former class. History. No complete native history of Egypt exists, and it is probable no king was anxious to preserve a record of the doings of his predecessors. Good specimens of the historical documents are the annals of the campaigns of Thutmose III, copied from a leather roll on the walls of the temple of Yemen at Karnak, the Acts of Ramses III, as found in the Harris Papyrus No. 1 in the British Museum, the account of the Battle of Kadesh, written by the court scribe Pentarut, the account of the invasion of Egypt by Pianke, the Nubian, the annals of Nastasin, describing the defeat of Cambyses. Good examples of biographical inscriptions of a historical character are found on the tomb stela of Una, Harkuf, and Tef, Amasis, and other feudal lords of Al-Kab, and in other places. Well, as we have mentioned earlier in this book, the King's List and some stuff were formed. Chronology. The most important documents are the Stela of Palermo, the King Lists of Saqqara, Abydos, and Karnak, and the Turin Papyrus, which, when complete, contained a list of about 300 kings of Egypt, with the lengths of their reigns given in years, months, and days. Okay, I spoke a little too soon, but there is some mythological information other than lists. Astronomy. List of the risings of stars were kept under the New Kingdom, and at a latter period, lists of the 36 decans and the 12 signs of the zodiac. Astrology. On this subject, much literature probably existed, but little of it, except the calendars of lucky and unlucky days and hours, has survived. Much of the ancient astrological lore is to be found in the almanacs in use among the peasant population of Egypt at the present day. Mathematics, geometry, and arithmetic are represented by the Rhine Papyrus in the British Museum, number 10,057. Geography as a science was unknown, but we have a map of the gold mines of the Sudan and a map of the sacred localities of the Fayum. Medicine, several books of the collections of prescriptions are known. Those in London, Paris, Leiden, Berlin, and California, the longest and most important being the Ebers Papyrus, but no treatise on anatomy has come down to us. The law, many documents of this class of literature exist, and they suggest that the Egyptians were fond of litigation. They deal with funerary endowments and benefactions, political and other adoptions, reports of law proceedings, etc. The record of the prosecution of tomb robbers by the crown in the reign of Ramses IX, is one of the most interesting of the last named class of legal documents. British Museum numbers 10,053 and 10,054. Songs. Fragments of a few songs of the folklore class have came down to us, and several love songs are preserved in the Harris Papyrus in the British Museum, number 500. The latter closely resemble, in phraseology, the Song of Solomon. A translation of the Song of Antuf, Song of the Harper, has been given above, page 135. It is a remarkable composition. Narratives or short stories. Among these may be mentioned as a special interest the story of Senehat. Here we have the story and adventures of a young man who, for some reason not quite clear, flees from Egypt into Palestine, where he is welcomed by the natives. And it wasn't called Palestine at the time. It's actually a twist of the, they're wallowing for the female Satans. That's literally what Palestinian meant back in that days, but, obviously this author is influenced by the Jews and the Christians carrying on of the insults of various people about the various peoples. He marries and begets a family, and gains renown by defeating and slaying a mighty man of war who had challenged him to combat. This part of the story resembles that of the killing of Goliath by David. At length, he yearns for his native country, and finally he returns there, and is warmly received by the king and his family. There he dies and is buried in a tomb provided for him by the king. In the story of the shipwreck, we read of a man who was shipwrecked and cast upon a phantom island, where he found an abundance of fruit and fish, and having used the fire stick, he made a fire and offered up a sacrifice to the entities. In due course, he met the genius of the island, which was a snake that was about 50 feet long, with a beard over 3 feet long. It received him in a most friendly manner, conversed with him, and eventually loaded him with gifts, and sent him away on a ship, which happened to visit the island. Is that a reference to pregnancy? But, the very interesting set of stories of magicians is found in the Westcar Papyrus in Berlin. The contents of some of these have already been alluded to. The Tale of the Two Brothers gives us a series of very short stories which originally had no connection with each other. A brief summary is given further on it in this chapter. The story of the doomed prince, which unfortunately is incomplete, shows that there is no way of escaping from one's fate. But that doesn't mean that what has been the situations that were ordained for you, that, everybody's decisions, they were known, but, they still were capable of making whatever decisions they were capable of making. As historical romances may be mentioned, the story of the quarrel between the Hyksos Ra-Apepe, king of Lower Egypt, and Sekhnen-Ra, king of Upper Egypt. British Museum numbers 10,185, and the capture of Joppa by an officer of Thothmes III. The latter romance has resemblances to the Arab story of Ali Baba. Okay, well, I don't think that's Baba. So, anyways. But so many of the times you have the Ah in the Egyptian transliterated by this, so why not keep that transliteration for all languages? And 40 Thieves. Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. The literature of travels is represented by the story of Unu Amun, who was sent to Syria to obtain cedar wood wherewith to build a new barge for the entity Yemen. He was robbed on his journey into Syria, and on his way he found himself at Cyprus. The story is incomplete, an example of the contemplative and semi-prophetical literature we have. One, the dialogue between a man and his soul. Though he is tired of life, he nevertheless advises his hearers to pursue the day of happiness and forget care. Um, there's there's a Berlin papyrus that has a dialogue between a man and a soul. He continues committing ritual suicide and some other stuff. Okay, how do you say that? So you ru ya nefer smux ah. The admonitions of a prophet are found in the papyrus at Leyden. Some of his utterances have been thought to be messianic in character. Well, every nation had its authentic prophets of different types, didn't it? The Lamentations of a Ka-Kepra Seneb is found on a wooden tablet in the British Museum, number 5645. The prophecy of Nefer-Rahu in a papyrus at St. Petersburg. The lament of the peasant found in papyri in Berlin. Religious magic is illustrated by the works found in the Salt Papyrus, British Museum, number 825, and in the Harris Papyrus, British Museum, number 10,051, and by the Book of Overthrowing Apep, British Museum, number 10,188. Legends of, those who they consider to be gods. Among these may be mentioned the legends of Ra and Yust, summarized above. We already went over a version of that. So when you personify and when you gender and personify and whatnot, divine qualities, of course, there's ends up being lineages and stories and stuff you have to put with it. But when you're talking about the jinn, well, maybe they did have lineages and stuff, and maybe divine names are given to them at a later date, well, are attributed to them by the people. Hence the term hence the translation of the Arabic term shirk being association. The creation of the world by Thra, the destruction of mankind, Har of Edfu, and the winged disc, Kensu Hatep, and the possessed princes, Nemu, and the 7 years famine. Think about this Joseph thing for a second there. The resurrection of Yasir, and the birth of Hor. Of her. Okay, yeah, her. The death and resurrection of her. The wanderings of Yust, as told in the Metternich Stela rituals. The oldest of these are the Book of Opening the Mouth and the liturgy of funerary offerings, whereby the transmutation of food and drink took place. Of so-called divine rituals, the longest and best known is the daily service used in the temple of Yemen at Thebes. Comic caricature is illustrated by a papyrus in the British Museum, numbers 10,016. Books of moral precepts. Several of these have been preserved, and the series now available for study enable us to follow the development of moral ideas in Egypt from about 3000 BCE to the end of the dynastic period. The authors were Kagemna, a wazir of King Huni of the 3rd dynasty, Ptahhotep, a wazir of King Asa from the 5th dynasty. They have their name because of that bull penis staff thing that they use. You figure they might have to be careful with it, although the Wa'uf, a royal official of the 6th dynasty, King Kate of the 9th or 10th dynasty, Amen Mahat the First, Sehet Pabra, an officer of Yemen Mahat the Third, Yemen Mapet, a minister of agriculture, and the scribe Annie. Anui, I think, is what we saw in that one text. Religious literature. The oldest collection of magical religious texts is found inscribed in hieroglyphs and on the walls of the chambers, the corridors of the pyramids of Saqqara, which are the tombs of kings of the 6th dynasty. These form the Heliopolitan recension of the Book of the Dead, another collection containing chapters from the above-mentioned pyramid text and several others, probably of a more recent date, was inscribed in hieratic on wooden sarcophagi and coffins of the 11th and 12th dynasties. Fine examples of these are the sarcophagus of Amu and the sarcophagi and coffins from Al-Barsha. The text on these form the recension of the Book of the Dead in use in Upper Egypt under the Middle Kingdom. Sometime after the 12th dynasty, the Theban recension of the Book of the Dead came into being. The oldest papyri containing it are written in hieroglyphs: the Papyrus of Nu, the Papyrus of Nebseni, the Papyrus of Iwa, the Papyrus of Ani, etc. But under the 19th dynasty, collections of chapters from it were written in hieratic, and in the Papyrus of Neset Ashru of the 21st dynasty, the whole work is in hieratic. The Theban recension is illustrated by a long series of vignettes, painted sometimes in monochrome and sometimes in many bright colors. In the Sa'ite recension, the chapters are written both in hieroglyphs and hieratic, and the chapters have a fixed order. The vignettes are drawn in black outlines. The Book of the Dead contains a large number of spells and incantations, which the deceased was supposed to repeat if he found himself in trouble or danger on his journey from this world to the kingdom of Yasir. Besides these, we find in it hymns, litanies, prayers, exegetical text, plans of the mummy chamber, the judgment hall of Yasir, the Alessian fields, with explanatory texts, drawings of the gates and the visions of the underworld, the ritual of the lamps, chapter 137, drawings of the boats of Ra, and a great mixture of miscellaneous mythological texts and traditions belonging to all periods and emanating from many different parts of Egypt. All were intended to help the deceased, and the whole book was regarded as an amulet of great power. Parts of it, the text relating to the judgment of Yasir, were in use in the Roman period. Later funerary works based on the Book of the Dead were the Book of Breathings, the Book of Traversing Eternity, the Book May My Name Flourish, etc. Works recited in connection with the miracle plays of Yasir were the Lamentations of Yust and... I forget how to say this. Well, you hear Yust a lot more of litanies of Seeker, etc. During the processes of embalming the dead, the Book of Embalmment was recited. At one period of Egyptian history, the theologians wrote guides to the underworld, the most interesting of these being the Book of Gates and the Book of Him in the Duat. Now, the throne journeys of the Kabbalists and stuff like this were certainly not, the Merkabah mysticism was certainly not first thing. Book of Gates and the Book of Him that is in the Duat. Okay. These supplied the deceased with a full description of the places through which he would pass and the names of the beings he would meet, and gave him the words of power necessary for him to complete his journey safely. Hymns to the entities form a large section of of Egyptian religious literature. The most important are the hymns to Yasir, Ra, Harmakis. That doesn't quite sound like a fully Egyptian thing, I don't think. It could be. Yemen and Dahote. The literature written in Demotic is considerable and consists of works of magic, tales illustrating the power of magicians, collections of moral precepts, various kinds of legal documents, marriage contracts, etc. Magic. Well, the Christians and the Jews started using this term magic to refer to, it's other groups. Magi had a particular thing. Magus meant, skilled and that sort of thing. But magic as the art and science of religion, I accept that meaning. Magic as the willful change of consciousness, I also accept that meaning. The Egyptians in all periods believed that earth, air, fire, and water were filled with spirits, each one of which was able to inflict injury upon them. Some were found by them to be kindly and well disposed towards man, but the greater number of them were believed to be malicious, vindictive, and hostile to man and all his works. The great entity who had made the universe was thought to be indifferent to the affairs of mankind, and to have permitted the spirits to obtain almost unlimited power and authority over man and his possessions. The Egyptians troubled themselves little about the good spirits, though they made offerings to them, and addressed words of respect and even affection to them, but they were horribly afraid of the evil spirits, and they spared no pains in placating them, and in trying to annul their power. The art of dealing with spirits of all kinds, with magic, was carefully studied by the priests, who were to all intents and purposes, in the earliest times, magicians pure and simple. The Egyptians of all classes esteemed magic highly, and King Cocteau stated in the work that he wrote for his son that Haka, magic was invented by Ra himself. Ra apparently did not care to trouble himself about mortal affairs, and therefore gave to man the gift of Haka so that he might be able to control the invisible and supernatural powers, both good and bad, for himself. Or at least, that's what they're led to believe, but people can feel good with certain things. Harpocrates, wearing the lock of youth, and standing on crocodiles with a canopy made of the body of the serpent Mahn, and held in position by Yust and Dahote. Above him is the head of the aged sun entity. His mastery over noxious animals is shown by his holding scorpions and serpents and savage animals in his grasp. Or perhaps it's because he's one of them. Could it mean that he's one of them and in line with them? Or perhaps just immune. But anyways, there's more to it. There's different variations on themes like this. Polytheistic figures representing the old man who renews his youth. Ra, the sun entity, who compromises his own persons. In his own person, all the powers, attributes, and forms of every kind of living creature. The text contains a series of spells which were intended to break the power of the Sabah fiends and the crocodiles and other evil reptiles. Sabah kind of relates to astrological entities. I'll show you a little here and there. And okay, I was just seeing how far this chapter goes. When Heka was used by man to benefit his fellow man, we may term it white magic. And when it was employed to slay or injure man or beast, black magic. I don't think it's that simple, and I don't think it's as simple as good and evil either. The men who became professional magicians no doubt possessed psychological powers above the ordinary, and were persons of ability and great shrewdness. They were skilled in all the learning of their time, and wrote the spells and incantations and charms which they used. Their assistants performed the rites and ceremonies that were the necessary accompaniments of spells. The chief instrument of the magician was the spell. To use this effectively, he had to be a properly qualified person, and to wear the garb and bear the equipment of such, he had to recite the magical formula in a certain tone of voice, clearly and correctly. For if he forgot any part of it or garbled it, the speech was inoperative. Well, intention and belief actually have their effect beyond that too. So, but don't think you can just intentionally mess up the form and do your best with the form of whatever spirituality you're going to do, right? And the rites and ceremonies had to be performed with scrupulous care. Ceremonial purity of both person and place was absolutely necessary. The magician wrote amulets for his clients on papyrus, leather, wood, and stone plaques, and figures made of wax, wood, and stone, using names of power, magical diagrams, etc., and strings of meaningless syllables of somewhat similar sounds. The most curious of all the monuments left by the Egyptian magician are probably the little tablets, rounded at one end, that were placed in the walls of houses and under the floors to protect their owners from the attack of evil spirits, fiends, goblins, demons, well, hobgoblins. I don't know if there's a difference between goblin and hobgoblin, and every kind of baleful influence that the Egyptians could imagine. Such a tablet is commonly called a cepis, a pillar of Her. And the finest example known is that which was published by Golinchev, Maternitstelle, Leipzig, 1877. It is figured on page 244 and 245. On this monument are sculptured nearly 300 figures of the entities of heaven, earth, and the Dawat, or the underworld. On the sides and reverse are cut a series of magical legends and hieroglyphs. For the descriptions of the figures and translations of the texts, see my Legends of the Gods, London, 1912. At some point I may share that book. I don't have that book. This cepis originally stood in a prominent place in some building, probably a temple, and was intended to protect it and those who were in it every moment of the day and night. On it are the figures of all the so-called gods and the so-called goddesses, of the cults of Ra and Yusur, and the so-called gods of the seasons of the year, the months, the weeks, the days of the week, the hours, the planets, the signs of the zodiac, the decans, etc. It was believed to protect Psemtek Ankhs, who had it made, from the attacks of Set, Apep, and other entities of evil, and from every injury that noxious reptiles and typhonic animals had the power to inflict upon man. The following extracts illustrate some of the characteristics of Egyptian literature. Hymn to Osiris, homage to thee, Yusur, Lord of Eternity, King of the entities, whose names are many, whose forms are holy, whose attributes are hidden in the temples, whose Ka is august, the astral soul, president of Tatu, Busiris and Mendes, mighty one, dweller in Sekhem, the praised one in the nome of Ati, president of Anu, the Lord commemorated in Ma'ate, the hidden soul, the Lord of the circle of the underworld, the Holy One of Memphis, the soul of Ra, whose very body rests in Hans, beneficent one who art hymned in Nart, the raiser up of his soul, the Lord of the temple of Chemenu, the mighty feared one in Shashetep, the Lord of eternity, the present of Abtu, Abydos. The path of his throne is in the Holy Land. His name is established in the mouths of men. He is the substance of the two lands, Egypt. He is the president of the company of the entities, the beneficent spirit among spirits. For him, Nu pours out his waters to him, approaches the wind at eventide, and the breeze comes to his nostrils to the satisfaction of his heart. He renews his youth. The heights of heaven and the stars obey him. He makes the mighty gates to open before him. He who is praised in the southern heaven and adored in the northern heaven, and never-setting stars are under his rule. And his abodes are the stars that never rest. Offerings came to him by the command of Geb. Isn't it Pop? The companies of the entities praise him. The stars of the Duat adore him. The ends of the earth bow before him. The boundaries of the sky pray to him. When they see him, the holy dead fear him. The whole earth praises him when it meets his majesty. He is the glorious master at the head of the masters, endowed with a higher rank, established in dominion. He is the beautiful Sksum power of the company of the entities, gracious of face and beloved by those who see him.